I could have if I'd have taken my sunglasses off.
Ah,
Hey, come on, guys, join in.
so,
The merriment
so that would have
has
been
begun.
important.
Yes.
I think
Yep, 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 yep.
we're gonna move on to, is there a motion to adopt the Finance, Buildings and Grounds Committee agenda?
Yes.
Second,
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Next, presentation of the fiscal 23-24 year-to-date, March, April financial summaries, and consider approval to move to the full board. Mr. McCray.
Thank you. As noted in your packet are the March and April financial statements, both revenues and expenses. There are no anomalies to report, which is great. And just a note to the committee, we are 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year, but we are not necessarily 3/4 of the way through our revenue and spending. Just how state aid flows, year-end tax settlements, as well as July and August payrolls, which are on an accrual basis. So not everything is easily visible, but we are 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year.
Anyone has? So I had a question. Fund 80, Community Service Fund. And I'll say it, maybe I just hadn't noticed this before, but it was, significantly higher than I expected, because I didn't think we had a couple $100,000 that we were intending to spend in that community service fund. Oh no, revised budget, that's why. Okay, never mind. I've answered my, yep, go ahead, you can.
Right, so just for the viewers, as well as congratulations, Commissioner Johnson, on joining the Finance, Buildings, and Grounds Committee. Fund 80 is not just our literacy program. It is also the fund in which we process Bags of Hope, the district's give back, if you will, to the community in terms of fundraising and expending on the initiative of feeding families throughout the service area.
So when I looked at this, I knew that we had set aside 80,000 to support the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. So I was surprised, and then as I thought about it, then the rest of it came to mind, so. All right. Any other questions? Okay, is there a motion to move it to the full board?
So moved.
Second.
Right, a motion and a second. All those in favor say,
Carl. I didn't raise it high enough.
you just gotta verbally say it for me.
yep.
I was too quiet.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Man, we are punchy tonight. Guess we were thinking it's 3 o'clock, so it's all fair game. Next, 1.5, update on long-range facilities master planning. I guess it can only be Mr. McCray.
It's only me. It is only me. So I provided 10 minutes because I knew Superintendent Holtzman was also on the agenda, but I'll take just a portion of that time just to really remind any viewers that our survey is wrapping up, and that is the survey related to our potential operating referendum as well as potential capital investment in district facilities. So results are pouring in. I believe the last time I looked, we were in excess of 1,900 respondents, which is great. So very appreciative for that feedback. You will receive as a full board a report, most likely in early June, potentially the latter meeting in June, in terms of the survey results. To provide the board with guidance. School Perceptions will be attending that meeting and presenting their data and their report for your consideration.
Has the survey closed?
Yes and no.
Well, that was-
It closed yesterday.
Yes, thank you.
all right.
was thinking the 21st, but the 20th, yes.
I thought so, but the way, the phrasing.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
thought,
no,
well,
very good. Now, if things are in the US mail, right, it's kind of like an absentee ballot, right? We will count that as it comes through, right? But in terms of the electronic portal, that certainly is closed.
Sure, okay. All righty. Any questions for Mr. McCray? Okay, seeing none. 1.6, update on 2020 referendum and ESSER-funded capital projects.
Yes, so Tammy and Dave were scheduled to present, but other duties have taken them away for the moment, so I continue to pinch hit, if you will. So a couple things. Work at Franklin, as you know, continues to be undertaken. You've not seen necessarily a lot of exterior activity because a lot of the activity is within the tunnels of the building. Right, so the univent system there, predominantly on the first floor, right, is all operated through the tunnels. So lots of piping work has been going on. But as soon as school ends, right, you will see the exterior work as well as interior work begin again. So let's just quickly recap. The old univents were put back in place in terms of the north end of the building. This go around, the north end of the building will see the new univents going in. Then on the south end of the building, if you will, kind of the cafeteria working its way towards the pool and then Arise Virtual Academy, you'll see glazing performed in that area. You'll see the univents removed, new univents put in, and then you'll also see probably in the coming weeks a large crane on site, which will then lift the chiller we have currently on site into place for the connecting point to begin. There is a switchgear, right, which I kind of view as really the big distribution point within the building. That is, if you will, on back order. You may recall we experienced the pandemic and we've had some supply chain issues. And while it seems like a long, long time ago, those supply chain issues still exist in particular components of construction. It's a Square D switchgear. Square D subs that work out, and then we're relying upon the sub to complete that work, create the switch gear, provide it to Square D. Square D will deliver it here. So the intent is still to wrap up that project prior to the start of school. There is the potential for delay of that switch gear beyond the start of school, which means that essentially there wouldn't be air conditioning at the beginning of the year. We're working with our vendors to hopefully avoid that. But it would not be unlike the preceding 50 years within that building, except the windows don't open. So that's Franklin. Also keep in mind, related to ESSER and actually this is a Fund 46 specific project, new glazing at Edison will be installed this summer. So that work will commence after the start or after the conclusion of school. So all new glazing going in and storefronts, not every storefront, but many storefronts which are glazed at Edison Middle School. You'll notice, and thank you to Commissioner Johnson for coming out, as well as Commissioner Ardrey, to the, I don't know, not ribbon cutting, but essentially the launch, if you will, of the 2 new greenhouses, which are also ESSER funded, both at Craig and at Parker. That work has commenced already at Parker, and at the end of the school year will commence at Craig. Right, so those are 2 large projects going on. Keep in mind, as we kind of roll back a little bit, is ESSER was able to support career and vocational tech education. So when we looked, if you will, at our options within that area, right, probably where we would have preferred to target, which is family and consumer science, right, in terms of commercial grade kitchens, the price tag for that just far exceeded any available ESSER funding. So next up, if you will, were our greenhouses, and that fit, if you will, rather nicely. We are taking some additional Fund 46 dollars and expanding out the restrooms, which are part of that building, to also allow for outdoor use, in particular anyone who happens to be, not anyone, but during athletic events and whatnot, we have access to restrooms within the building. The building will certainly be secured, but people can have access to the restrooms. We also have other projects underway, right? And again, we don't build necessarily things that one can drive by and see in their car, but that very exciting topic of a building automation system. Again, it's targeted. It's unfortunately not district-wide, but the building automation system, as referenced in your memo, and as well as this committee many times over, right? That work is commencing. as well as our fire alarm system upgrades and the enunciators at the schools identified within the memo as well. Those two projects go back to our available referendum dollars, which are dwindling as time goes on.
When will we be?
Hello. Sorry. When will you be leading additional tours for us? Because I've never been inside Franklin, and I would like to see Franklin.
So I'll take that one.
Okay, Greg.
Since this is really the start of the committee year, I think that is something that we will look to do as school starts. Is
Oh,
to just say, okay, what schedule do we want to go through, and then pick off, say, 4 elementaries, a middle, and kind of match it that way.
Okay.
And then get through that over the next board year.
But I'm new, and so I would really
Yeah.
appreciate a few, at least one during the summer, something like
I
that.
can see what we can do over the
Okay.
next several weeks, I guess.
Okay.
So one of the
Okay.
things, once we hit the summer, we can do it, but what we see is not what it really looks like, because they rip the building apart, and they literally don't, like, they pull everything out for massive deep cleaning and,
Oh, no, I fully
yeah.
am aware of
beautifying it,
that.
so,
I've,
yeah,
I've seen buildings during the summer, so I know that.
yeah, so that's the only reason why we really wouldn't be doing that in the summer, so. But as soon as we can do that.
Okay.
We can see if we can fit in something here before the end of the school year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I think so, building automation system, and I think it's a little bit, and really it's more so for you, Commissioner Johnson. Maybe you already know the major benefits of the building automation system, because it is fairly significant compared to what we have today. I'm not gonna put Mr. McCray on the spot completely on this one, but so what we've had over the years is able to view the system at the local buildings to say, here are all of the temperature points and control points and statuses. So now the systems were put in is to be able to tile it together and then actually be able to do it from here at the ESC. Mr. Leader would have access to all of that, maybe others, but clearly be able to see the statuses. So if someone's saying, my room's cold, my room's too hot, then we would be able to see some of those things to see, number one, is it true? And if so, then we can work to address that. And I think it was one term that was used, and I think it's important because I don't necessarily know if you guys have any idea what a switchgear is. But really, it's a commercial grade breaker box, much like we would have in our homes, except it's at a larger level for the schools, so. Yep. Can I add something, Mr. McCray, to the switchgear conversation?
No. Wow, okay, that's really loud. So, remember to use my indoor voice, not my outdoor coaching voice with the microphone. So, Ms. Johnson, though, Commissioner Ardrey is spot on, obviously, in terms of the building automation system. Just real quick synopsis is when you look at a district our size and our age, if you go back to what controls, essentially kind of the thermostat, if you will, in your own home, it's just on a much larger scale here in the School District of Janesville. If we go way back, and Commissioner Millard will recall this, is a lot of our buildings are what they call pneumatic systems, which requires a compressor to push air through copper to control heating, right? So it's very old. We have also buildings that are on what's called DDC, or direct digital control, right? And then that's a little more similar to your thermostat at home, right? Or if you have a smart thermostat, and you can kind of see essentially what's going on. Commissioner Ardrey is exactly right in terms of the ability to manage all of that from a desktop, but we just have very old systems and then we have new systems. But it's not just the software, it's also the controllers that move things such as air handlers and dampers and other things associated with the mechanical systems of a building. So part of the base package, if you will, going back to what we're surveying, includes upgrades to those systems, right? Simply because it's cost prohibitive to incur that type of cost in our annual operating budget when we look at the scope of work that needs to be completed.
I appreciate you saying pneumatic and not coal.
Yes. So we're making good pace, and I'll try to keep that pace up. Really want to take a moment to capture all the work that's been done since 2013 to present in the School District of Janesville related to, if you will, capital investment. Sometimes it's not always capital improvement. A new sidewalk could perhaps be an improvement, but a lot of our dollars go back to fixing exactly what we have, particularly when they're, if you will, operational dollars. There we go. So as we know, Janesville is a great place to learn, right? Particularly when we look at academics, athletics, and the arts. So our facilities support those learning initiatives. Just a quick recap, we have 12 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, 2 high schools, 1 charter high school that specifically is our building, and that's Rock River Charter School. We certainly have Rock University High School, which is on the Black Hawk Tech campus. And of course, 1 district office. Typically, we spend between $1 to $2 million towards capital maintenance. That's really less than 1% of our budget, right? A large percent of our budget certainly is people, because that's essentially the industry that we're in. So shout out to Julie Yerke, who went back and did some digging, if you will, because we didn't necessarily have the accounting structure in place to track at a building level. So that accounting structure in the last few years has changed to where we can actually track by building location. So quickly, since 2013, the district in its operating budget has put forth just over $12.1 million. Some unassigned or just projects that are perhaps at the Chestnut House or here at the ESC fall within that first bucket of the district, just under $600,000. We then can move to the elementary, and we've invested just over $6.4 million, just over $3 million at the middle school, and just over $2 million, nearly $2.1 million at the high school. And this is out of our general operating budget. This is non-Act 32. This is not referendum dollars. This is not ESSER dollars. This is essentially local dollars out of our operating budget. Speaking of Act 32, back in 2017, the district initiated an Act 32 energy exemption measure within its revenue limit authority. Act 32 is no longer available to school districts in the state of Wisconsin, so that tool was taken away. We got in just, I think, in the last year, and the district put forth mostly at Edison, approximately $14.75 million of energy improvements. So that's things such as all the mechanicals and other water and anything related to energy. So it's not necessarily the educational adequacy, although certainly improving the learning ambient air temperature of a building hopefully improves the learning environment. But this is not new carpet. This is not new furniture. It really was specific to energy savings. Some recent activities is we're very grateful to the community for supporting the capital investment of $22.5 million back in 2020. We focused, if you will, on secure pathways, targeted boiler upgrades, building automation systems as noted, fire alarm systems that I referenced earlier. We are still waiting on an RFP to come back, if you will, on our district-wide overhead paging. We're also, if you will, embarking upon somewhat targeted, not district-wide, a card access upgrade. That ties in with our building automation system. So those are some projects. So secure pathways, boiler and associated work, as well as life, safety, and security system upgrades. Again, $22.5 million. We're also leveraging approximately $11 million of ESSER funding. As a reminder, ESSER funding will conclude September 30th. All projects need to be completed by that time, September 30th, 2024. That's approximately $8 million of ESSER funding at Franklin, and the remaining balance being invested as the 2 greenhouses that I referenced earlier in the report. We're also complementing some of that work because $8 million doesn't really go very far when you're looking at a mechanical system upgrade at nearly a 150,000 square foot building. So we're targeting the window replacement as referenced out of Fund 46. Window replacement is a component also out of Fund 46, and then a roof section at Franklin also related to Fund 46. Fund 46, just to recap, was adopted in 2015. The board took action to create a long-term sinking fund, capital investment fund. There was a 5-year moratorium until those funds could be spent, so that really released those dollars in 2020. And so when we have remaining dollars at the end of the year, we have an option to put some of those remaining dollars in Fund 46, and the board has taken advantage of that. Just to recap, and I think it's important to note that as a district, we are leveraging opportunities that are presented to us outside of always going to voters and asking for a referendum. That certainly is probably the most common and certainly a very good tool if available to implement. But on our operating budget could certainly be more, but also taking advantage again of Act 32 as well as ESSER funds. We've leveraged that. We are making investments in our facilities. The size of our physical plant, though, really just requires additional investment.
I don't really have a question. I have a statement. As we talk to people, I believe we have to make people very aware that the school district is separate than the city, is separate than the other jurisdictions. I won't go through them all and that, because I talked to a couple elderly ladies, and they said, we're not gonna vote for that. And I got a chance to chat with them a few minutes, thanks that one of the ladies left something on the counter, and I went out and took it out to the car for her.
Sure.
And I got to do it, and I said, you know, I know taxes have gone up in that, but the school districts really hasn't gone up of any real consequence. They've been neglected for years. And if you vote against you think you're voting against the city, you're voting against the school and the children. So you have to think a little bit differently than that. Be aware that that's a separate item. Each entity is their own entity. And you have to look at what they're funding. The overall budget, you're saying, coming together, but you can't blame just the schools or just anything else. Everything is independent. So she said, well, I'll take another look at that. So hopefully, it might have convinced her. She's elderly, and I understand her property taxes are tougher. So I wanted to make that aware that these are the things we have to look at. Not only we talk people, but when we push our PR out there.
Yeah, and thank you for advocating, as you always do, on behalf of the school district. So I think as we move forward, pending upon the results of the survey, as well as pending any action as directed by the board, you know, you'll see a very comprehensive informational campaign, right? So it's not public relations, it's really more information and sharing essentially the facts is what we'll be able to do. So some of that, whether that's maybe embedded in an FAQ on the website, whether it's a component of most likely 3 direct mail drops, right? We'll see how we can perhaps weave that in. There's so much information to share, right? We can't share it all, otherwise people will just toss it. But certainly it's noted, and again, thank you for advocating on behalf of the district.
Under Parker High School, there was a roofing replacement in 2017, and then right away in 2018, there was a re-roofing project.
Sure.
What happened there, and if we had to correct for some bad work? I'm hoping we didn't have to pay for that.
No,
The new roof.
Yeah, that's an astute observation on your part. Parker High School, Craig High School, and many of our buildings just have multiple roof sections, right? So probably what we're seeing there is a roof section, and then the next year a subsequent section. My guess is the individual who typed in the narrative, one is maybe roof replacement, perhaps it says roof, re-roof, right? It's really the same type of work. It's not a correction of
Okay.
work that was done.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things, if I may, so we've engaged a partner, speaking of roofing, called Apex Building Consultants, and they specialize in building envelope, in particular roofing. So they've done an initial assessment of our roofs, and then the next thing for them to do, and this is something that we'll be sharing with the committee in the future, is if, let's say, and I'm making this number totally up, Craig High School has 19 roof sections. Well, what is the age of roof section, of each roof section, right? And so we need to have that inventory because that really helps us to schedule out. Mr. Leader's done some initial work. This is really kind of taking that type of reporting mechanism to the next level, so we do have that. We have nearly 2 million square feet in roof, and a basic price is $30 per square foot. That's a $60 million asset that no one sees unless they're in an airplane, right? So it just speaks to the depth, if you will, or breadth of our facilities and the infrastructure needed to support what goes on. We have lots of roofs.
So, and I think this is important, I mean, this is great information. Before 2013, was there any budget allocated within our operating budget for any capital work?
Yes. We just didn't pull that data. We didn't pull the data in particular, like, again, we hope the data will be easier to pull since we're assigning an accounting code to each building, and then we can pull that by building location. Historically in the past, everything's been dumped into, if you will, or recorded in an 800 location, which is district-wide. So then we're reliant upon the narrative. Ms. Yerke, probably just going back 10 years, has about 40 to 50 hours in sorting through the data. So we just needed to draw the line somewhere and went back 10.
So that is part of the answer. The other part of the answer is, at some point, we had no monies earmarked for, I'll say, replacement. We did what we needed to do from a capital standpoint. Excuse me. There's various inspections and things that we have to do, but there wasn't necessarily any money that was earmarked to go replace a roof section until there was an issue. So, and that was for many years because we had no, I'll say, capital plan to address anything. So that was one of the changes that has happened, at least now, even before where we're at today, is to say, what is the worst items for us that we can start picking away at? And what we have before us is the 12 million, or I think that was the number, that we were able to pick away at. So, just to share that.
Thank you for that enhancement.
Okay, if nothing else, a fiscal perspective on the district health insurance benefits. Mr. McCray and Ms. Brown. To hear a different voice.
Sure, well, I do appreciate Mr. Gasper's assistance in pulling up this particular PowerPoint. I know working on technology in this building is a goal of the district. So real quick, I'd say probably over the last 9 months, I truly appreciate the collaboration with Jamie Brown, who's our manager of employee benefits and wellness, as well as Mr. Gardner. It has been, I think, hopefully a mutually beneficial collaborative relationship over the last 9 months. So my intent, right, is a lot of times we talk about benefits at PPC, right? And the hair maybe a little bit on the back of my neck stands up because those benefits have a dollar sign in front of them, right? And so there's significant investment and significant portion of the district's budget. And again, I'll go back to emphasizing the collaborative approach the last 9 months. So we wanted to kind of take a little bit of that fiscal perspective. And so you have obviously a handout, and then you have an 11 by 17 worksheet. I know Ms. Jensen really enjoys those large worksheets for her filing system for the board's permanent record, which she doesn't allow me to print those anymore for her. So luckily for you, you get the big ones. So some of our goal, and again, I'm going to lean in a little bit to Ms. Brown and Mr. Gardner, just to provide some additional narrative if need be or if warranted or however we want to frame that. So the goal here is really understanding the district's commitment to the total reward, and we're going to go into that a little bit. I probably selfishly would say, well, I may be the debit and credit guy, right? My perspective, and I'd say the perspective of my department is much broader and complements the work across the hall in human resources, because the reality is we are a people-oriented entity, right? And without people, it's difficult to deliver the mission, right? So money and people go hand in hand in supporting the mission. We're going to talk a little bit about balancing cost, culture, compliance, total reward. We're going to hit a lot of terms. Talk a little bit about medical loss ratio, a fiscal perspective, illustrating of the Mercy Family Plan premium, right? Looking forward and kind of what's next. When we get to what's next, right, please don't anticipate we're going to have a line item or PPC is going to get like, here's the 73 options we have to pursue in the future. That's not the intent. We really, though, have to kind of start to think a little more strategically, perhaps a little more theoretical in terms of what the future looks like for the district in regards to total reward. We know the district has 4 priorities, right? Student academic excellence, staff excellence, operational excellence, and family and community partnership, really. And when we talk about total reward, that would be a component, if you will, of staff excellence. Having excellent staff means the ability to attract and retain, and part of that happens to be, if you will, within the total reward concept. Okay, so Zingham and Schuster, right? So this is what happens when you go to grad school and you really take a class, and it's a fascinating class, right? You talk about the various components of the total reward, individual growth, compelling future, positive workplace, and really we're going to talk a little bit about total pay, right? Base pay. We don't have variable pay, right? We don't get bonuses per se, but in particular we also have benefits and indirect pay as well as recognition and celebration. When we think of benefits, right, and this is probably something that I learned throughout my professional career is, right, culture is very important, cost is very important, and compliance is very important. We're balancing those 3 aspects. So you may say, well, what's up with the compliance, right? Well, there's Affordable Care Act compliance, there's IRS compliance, there are lots of rules and regulations related to benefits as well as even direct compensation such as pay. Pause for a moment. We're going to go through some terms, right? So you can kind of use this, if you will, as your glossary, right? ADC is the actuarially determined contribution. If you see EE, that's going to be the employee. ER is going to be the employer. FAHP, you've heard this before, right? Family Advantage Health Plan. FY or FYE, fiscal year or fiscal year end. HSA, Health Savings Account. IRS is not the Internal Revenue Service, right? When it comes to us, it's the implicit rate subsidy. MLR is medical loss ratio, and OPEB, that we often say, right, is other post-employment benefits. Don't be surprised if I drop another acronym that I didn't think to put into the glossary, right? So just accept me for who I am. So medical loss ratio, right? So again, working with Ms. Brown on this, right? And if you kind of go from the most recent is up on top, we do not have medical loss ratio or MLR for the current fiscal year. Right, so we're looking at 22-23. You'll see the green dotted line. If premiums represent 100% paid, dotted line, right, that's what we're charged, that's what we pay. The percentage that exceed that are dollars spent by the carrier, right, underwriting what we didn't pay. Medical loss ratio. So one way to look at it is our carriers are losing money. Any questions on MLR? Okay. As a district, we're fortunate to provide a dual choice program. That means we have 2 medical plans, Mercy or Dean, right, that folks can choose. We pay 88% of the lowest cost premium, which in recent years has been Mercy. Dean's premiums are outpacing If an employee wants to subscribe to Dean, they will essentially pay more to subscribe to that plan. 88-12 is our mix, just to recap that. And so obviously what you can see is we're starting to see a little bit of spread between the two plans in terms of participants. These are not families, these are the actual employees, if you will, who are the subscribers. Last year, you can see, right, Mercy was at 127% loss ratio, right, and Dean was at 146% loss ratio. The spread is of concern, assuming we want to provide and continue to provide a dual choice plan.
These are figures provided by the provider of the service, Dean and Mercy in this case.
It's probably, yes, it's a combination. So Ms. Brown utilizes a software, right, that captures enrollment. So during open enrollment process, I may subscribe to an employee plus one, right? You may subscribe to a family. Commissioner Ardrey may subscribe to a single, right? So we can manage that. Ms. Brown sees that, right? And that's what, if you will, feeds the billing provided by both Dean and Mercy, right? So it's kind of a dual thing, right? It's a cross-check, it's a reconciliation. When it comes to MLR though, we're not tracking MLR. Our providers do that. So that's why it's a couple of different variations of data.
That was what I was wondering, the provider does it. For specific things, do we compare the two, what they say the cost of it is? In other words, let's for simplicity, we'll say a childbirth. Do we compare what this one charges and what the other one charges?
I'll probably turn the microphone over to Ms. Brown. I think I know the answer, right? But that's why she's here.
Okay, because we're on their trust. And I hope, good, thank you.
Yes, so as it comes to the billing aspect from Dean and Mercy, we actually don't necessarily know what Dean is charging for the birth of a child versus what Mercy is charging for the birth of a child. And some of that could be because we don't know what services are being rendered for this person versus this person, because it's always different. Looking forward at more maybe of a general procedure would be something that we could look at as far as pricing.
So if I may add to that, right? So keep in mind, both Dean and Mercy have contracts with other providers, right? So I'll give you an example. So I'm currently a Mercy subscriber, right? However, my medical care for the most part is provided at Fort Healthcare. So if Kim and I were going to have a child, if we were much younger, of course, right, we would probably have that child at Fort Healthcare, right? Now, that's not at Mercy, right? So Fort Healthcare may have a different billing rate or a contract rate with the Mercy Health Plan, and that may differ than if we were to have that child at Mercy.
Correct.
Similarly, if you're on Dean, right, you may go to Beloit Memorial, or you may go to St. Mary's, right? So those providers just have different contracts with different medical providers throughout our service area.
So we have limited control. That's what they do. And that, I'm not trying to pick on anyone, I'm just saying, and I'm looking as that an opening for the future, for future discussions of some sort. And I do understand certain types of births are different than others, or replacing a toenail, or whatever it may be. What was involved could be different. And that, like the emergency room, both two people come in for short of breath, and they get two different types of care, because probably is not the same thing. So I'm just wondering. Thank you.
And it's also true that hospitals themselves are not transparent in their pricing at all. And actually, that issue is going to be coming up before the state legislature very soon, too. So this is an ongoing discussion, and I think, in my part, this is how I go about thinking about things. I start out far and wide with many different ideas, many different choices. I don't think about only what was done in the past. Frankly, that never bothers me, what was done in the past. What needs to be, what's true now and what needs to be happening in the future is what I like to think about. So that's how I go about this kind of thing, and that's how I'm going to be moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to transition to the handout. All right, so I think for those of you who have water, I apologize. If you have a caffeinated beverage, thank you very much. All right, so this is going to the 11 by 17 handout. Yep, go to the 11 by 17 handout. So Cottingham, our broker, Cottingham and Butler, which is our broker, works closely with Ms. Brown and Mr. Gardner, right, is a lot of times they work in the aggregate, right? And in the business office, we at times can work in the aggregate, and we work in the disaggregated data, right? So we're very much a school district focused on fund accounting. Our staff are predominantly in 3 funds. Fund 10, our general operating fund. Fund 27, special education. Fund 50, student nutrition. And Fund 43, while there are people in there, it's really related to our Employee Benefit Trust Fund, or OPEB, other post-employment benefits. So those are 4 funds when we're looking at the cost of many things, but in particular health insurance that are under consideration. All right, this is ugly. We're not going to go line by line, row by row, cell by cell, right? But this is what it looks like if I were to export from Skyward into an Excel report. Kind of looks like it, right? So Fund 10 is at the top, Fund 27 is in the middle, Fund 50, if I look down the left-hand column, and then if I continue down the left-hand column, you're going to see Fund 73. When we look to health insurance expenses, right, Fund 10, 27, 50 are always going to be expenses. There is no revenue. When we get to Fund 73, there is revenue and there is expenses. And again, Fund 73 is entirely related to benefits provided to our retirees from the district. I guess I just got ahead of myself a little bit, but Fund 10, 27, and 50, right? You'll see that noted in the green line, right? And we're going to point out a few things. If you look at line 16, right, you'll see health costs for Funds 10, 27, and 15, and this is over a 10-year period, 11-year period actually, right? If we go back to 2012-13, you'll see our total outlay for costs was $14.5 million and change. If we go all the way to last fiscal year, we were at $12,044,000, right? So we've seen a decrease over time in terms of our healthcare expenditure, and that's for all things, whether that's premiums from the district's perspective, HSA contributions. If you go back early, probably when Commissioner Ardrey joined the board, way back when in the early teens there, we had a prescription plan. So if you go to that first column, and maybe Mr. Millard remembers this as well, you'll see $2,182,000 that related to drugs. During that period of time, the district was self-insured, right? So we were tracking premiums or cost, if you will, as well as drugs. Okay, that changed as time went on. Any questions on line 16? Okay, we can go to line 17. This is ER, or the employer premium only cost. Back in 2012-13, it was 11 million, 0.8, right? And last year it was 10.9. Premium only cost. Okay, we're going to get a little complicated here on the next line, which is line 18. So employer premiums inclusive of the IRS or the implicit rate subsidy payback, right? So active employees, our premiums for active employees are higher because we have retirees on our medical insurance. Because they're higher, right, there's a discount, and that discount is paid by Fund 73, our OPEB trust. So this last fiscal year, it was just north of $800,000, right? So that's an expense to Fund 73 and a credit to the employer contributions of Fund 10, 27, and 50, just over $800,000. All we're gonna talk about Fund 73 coming up next. So Fund 73, as I referenced earlier, is both a revenue as well as an expense fund related to OPEB. If you go to line 20, you'll see the district contribution to OPEB, other post-employment benefits. So what we try to do is fund our liability. If we didn't fund it, we would have an unfunded liability, or we would have a pay-as-you-go liability. So with the establishment of a Fund 73, it's making investments for future obligations related to health insurance. There is, if you will, a ADC, or actuarially determined contribution. There's a report that's provided every year that's included in the audit. It's updated about every 3 years, just in case there are any design changes or demographic changes. So we work closely with Ms. Brown, right? We're generating censuses, we're providing our actuary kind of the current plan design changes, if any exist, right? Because they're projecting the district's future liability. And we are working to fund that liability, again, rather than unfunding a liability, which would not be good fiscal sense. In the past, what we've done is we've kind of relied upon some available dollars at the end of the year, and we would make those deposits into Fund 73. And you'll see those deposits over that 11-year period. They vary, but the actuarially determined contribution is just over $2.5 million. That's essentially just to keep pace with that future obligation. If you underfund it, you're just creating a greater liability. If you overfund it, you're reducing that liability. So last few years, we've been about 2.5 to 2.65 in terms of contributing to that. What we've done is we've actually created an expense line, so we're not waiting for dollars at the end of the year. We're incurring those expenses or accumulating those expenses throughout the year. It's a budgeted line. That's the fiscal prudent thing to do for us as a district. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I think it's in the upcoming agenda item related to year end. You'll also notice, if you will, kind of on line 25, right, the implicit rate subsidy, and that's the dollar value, right? It's a calculation. We do that internally. The Department of Public Instruction has a formula for that, right? And then that's what we kick back, if you will, to reduce the district's premiums at fiscal year end, because we're paying an inflated premium as a result of having retirees on the plan. That's a little bit about that, Fund 73. Any questions on Fund 73? Lot of data. And again, the intent here is just to, when you see dollar values of 14 million, right, keep in mind, right, as we're balancing our operational budget as well as our OPEB contributions and our OPEB expenditures related to post-retirement benefits. Okay. Yes, sir.
Who controls the money and where it is? And who does, and I see unrealized gain on investments.
Mm-hmm.
Do we control where the money is invested in there, or is that just the state, or what?
Yeah, great question. It is not the state, so I'll kind of tickle your memory banks there a little bit. As you recall, we work with the Wisconsin Investment Series Cooperative. So whether it's a Fund 73 cash balance, a Fund 50 cash balance, or just any of our cash balances, we invest them through WISC. So when interest rates are going up, we're gaining returns on those investments. If interest rates are flat, we're not gaining much, right? So if we went back to probably 2021, right, interest rates were under 1%, right? Banks need to make a little bit money. Our return on investment was probably 10 to 20 basis points, which is 0.1 to 0.2%. Excuse me, of 8%, not 8%, but of 8%, right? So when we're at 5%, that would be 500 basis points. That's a much better return. That's where we're at now. So when we see a return on investment, that's where we're seeing that return.
That did refresh, thank you.
Absolutely. Right, so working with Ms. Brown, we kind of took a little bit of a different approach, right, just to kind of illustrate a particular plan. Now, as you'll recall, we have Dean and Mercy. We have single, single plus one, single or member, employee plus spouse, I should say, is kind of the third option, and family, right? So we can run 8+ different scenarios within the HMO segment of our plan alone, right? So rather than doing that, because I've already drowned you with a lot of data, right, we focused, if you will, on the family plan at Mercy. If we go back to 2024, right, the entire cost of a family plan at Mercy was split $18,000 and change for the district, $2,400 for the employee. When we saw the rate increases of 11.5% come in, right, those split of 8812 went from $2,400 on the employee to $2,700 on the employee, and from $18,000 for the district to $20,000 for the district. So that's a $283 increase that the employees are contributing more for those who subscribe to the Mercy Family Plan, and a $2,076 increase or contribution on behalf of that employee on the Mercy Family Plan. So when costs go up of 11.5%, right, the district, you as a board, are carrying a major portion of that price increase. So roughly of a $2,300 and change price increase, right, the district's picking up 88% of that, or $2,076. So when we go back to total reward, and we're talking about direct compensation as well as indirect compensation, such as benefits, right, as a package, that's going forward. All right, so I kind of wanted to project a little bit. Okay, this is not the 10 Commandments, right? This is not chiseled in stone. If I assumed a 3% increase in wages for an introductory teacher, right, and an 11.5% increase in a single plan, right, and we move forward to 2930, so 2029, 2030 school year, right, we can see a wage of $54,000 projected. It's not going to be the actual, right, projecting, right, and then we can see a single health plan of 11,500. Right, so over time, it's a 54% increase in health insurance premiums and a 12% increase in wages. All right, that's assuming an 11.5% increase in premiums moving forward. And this is just the single plan. Right, so I appreciate Mr. Millard. We had the opportunity to meet, I don't know, 2 or so weeks ago, right? And I think a great compliment, not necessarily of me, but I think of the team that we have and even of the district's leadership of late, right, is, are we looking forward? Are we looking forward? Right, so we cannot just operate within a current budget year, then look at the next budget year and compartmentalize our decision making. Right, so are we looking forward? So we've used a forecast model fiscally, right, and this is a very crude forecast, if you will, of what potentially could happen for an introductory teacher with a wage and a single health plan. So the package now roughly is about $55,000 next year, right, and in 5 years it would be $65,000. Now I'm not saying folks don't warrant a higher wage, right, or adequate benefits, right, but the reality is, and this is a topic that we discussed at the last Finance Committee meeting, right, is our revenue limit per member, when we look at the Big 8, is very low. When we look at the Rock County, we're probably on par, right? There are a district or two in Rock County that exceeds where we are at. We also took a look at the allowable revenue limit increases that have not kept pace with inflation and what our funding gap has been. So that slide deck, just if you want to recall and you can't sleep tonight, right, is in your board docs. Right, so is it an expense problem? Is it a revenue problem? And the answer to that is probably both yes. Right, so, but we have to look forward. And so when we're making decisions or you see an administrative recommendation coming forward, there's a lot of thought that's put into that. And that thought is how are we managing the future and not just living for today? So what's next? I referenced at the beginning of the presentation, truly appreciate the collaborative approach, right? In terms of how do we focus on the total reward concept of a district, right? So that's wages, that's benefits, that's working environment, that's providing appropriate tools to our staff, whether they're a teacher or whether they're a groundskeeper at Craig High School. Right? So we focus a lot on teachers because that's our onstage product, right? But we cannot forget about our support staff, right, which is working behind the scenes. Right? And our support staff don't necessarily also start out at the teacher wage. But yet they're carrying the same health benefit plan. So, collaborative approach to what's looking forward. And again, keep in mind, I'm sure it's your objective, it's my objective, it's Superintendent Holtzman's objective, I'd say it's every administrator's objective, right? Is how do we continue to maintain the long-term sustainability of the district, as well as its benefits or compensation or its facilities. So we're always looking forward. Covered a lot there. Again, Ms. Brown, Mr. Garner are here if you have any specific questions, but we wanted to kind of provide just a bit of a different twist. And so when you're receiving information as a board, there's certainly the policy considerations, but there are also fiscal considerations. Okay. It's warm in here. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. As I said before, I'm always also looking forward. And so one question I have though is when you are involved in this collaboration and you are looking forward, what are all the various, or some examples, give me some examples of variables you're looking at. I want to know what you're looking at versus what you're not really looking at in terms of the future.
So maybe we can kind of tag team that a little bit, right? You know, the easiest lever, and again, I think Ms. Brown and Mr. Garner and I can kind of, as I shared, tag team this. You know, plan design is always interesting, but plan design sometimes is the easy button, right? And I'm speaking globally, right? Because I'd say there are a number of levers. We talked about the different levers. Plan design's a lever. Contribution rates are a lever, right? There's some of those big levers, and what you're trying to do probably, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Brown, right, is there's a combination there somewhere, right? And what's that combination? People will sometimes say, well, do this. You know, they do that in Clinton. Absolutely, they do that in Clinton. And I'll say Clinton has a $5,000 HRA reimbursement, right? And they also have a revenue limit per member of over 14,000, and we're at 12.5. Right, so why is our HSA not as comparable as to their HRA? That's one example in terms of a driving factor. The other things, if we're looking at total reward, right, so a little bit of a long question, or long answer, right, is, and we're gonna do some additional data that we'll bring forth, right, is when we look at, let's say, the total reward in terms of compensation and benefits, right, Clinton has a much shorter salary schedule. So then they're plowing their dollars into benefits in an environment where the revenue limit is much higher per member than ours, right? So that's their combination, but their combination probably can't necessarily be applied to our combination here in the School District of Janesville because the factors or the values are just different, right? So I said a lot and didn't really say anything, right? Other than, you know, what are those levers? What are those combinations? I'll tell you, I think I can go out on a limb here, but it's certainly the board's prerogative. When I started in a district, they wanted to move every employee to the Affordable Care Act. Yeah, that was a nice idea by a superintendent who is no longer there shortly after my arrival. We didn't do that, right? So there are all those things out there, but like what makes sense? And then we go back to cost, culture, and compliance, right? So what's the culture of the organization? What's the cost to the district? And then is it compliant, right? Because again, we have IRS, we have the Affordable Care Act. Like, everyone look forward to their 1094s, right? Which go to the IRS, actually you don't see them, but you get the 1095s, right? There are all these things that go into play. So, sorry, didn't say much, and I don't think, I did that somewhat intentionally, right? Because there's no magic formula. Wellness, right, is a factor. Contribution rates are a factor. Premium costs are a factor. HSA is a factor. HRA is a factor, right? Retirees are a factor. There's all those factors, and you try to get to the right combination that's in balance with cost, culture, and compliance. It's complicated. It's like school funding. Ms. Brown? I said a lot.
Yeah.
But maybe said nothing.
No, yes, I would agree with Dan, and, you know, as we try to, you know, for the health insurance and the total rewards benefits, we are also looking, meeting with other districts, like, what are you offering? Maybe not necessarily strictly towards the health insurance, but even other benefits that we can offer our employees. So working with other districts on that, what they offer, what works, what doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're completely baffled over this one, so we'll just move on.
Not a problem.
Not exactly, but it's complicated. Next is update on the 24-25 budget development.
Yeah, just a quick update. So we're still targeting the July meeting for an initial budget adoption, right? So we're still working through some things. Certainly, we've pretty much settled in on staffing, but keep in mind, particularly Ms. Johnson, is there are a number of variables that are still into play as we move forward, and I'm sure you're familiar with them. The third Friday count, equalization aid, dollar value, all those come in, estimates July 1, which is why it's good that we'll kind of have a preliminary budget adoption in July, because we'll be close, but we won't be on target, right, with that initial estimate. And then, of course, we have our final property values, which don't provide the district any additional funding, but it certainly drives the mill rate.
All right, next, 1.10, information, possible action on fiscal year allocation for Fund 73-26.
As I referenced in the earlier presentation, so we are targeting a budget of 2.5 million, right? That's an actual line. It's kind of scattered throughout the budget, right? If there are additional funds, we recommend going up to 2.65 million. So essentially an additional 150,000 into the Fund 73 OPEB trust, and then any remaining dollars going into Fund 46. Over time, just again recap, right, those available dollars remaining have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. So we do have some movement as we work through the year, but that is essentially what the board will see at its June board meeting, unless you all have comments.
Any questions? So, as we've talked about, and I think it's important to note, as Mr. McCray said, this opportunity has shrunk. That means we've done a better job of having a budget and the line items meet what the expectations are, as opposed to maybe overinflating some areas and having a more robust opportunity at the end of the year. So kudos to Mr. McCray and your team and others.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next one is, yep, yep. Next, we need a motion.
So moved.
Good going. Motion by Mr. Millard, second by Ms. Johnson. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. And that passes unanimously. next item, and I will open this one up, it's gender equity among administrators. This was a board request several years ago, and I think it's important just to make sure we, maybe not annually, but at least every several years, take a look just to make sure of, is there anything that sticks out as anything not being equitable? So this was really a request that I had. I'm not sure is any particular, I mean, it's lots of information, and I'm not sure Mr. McCray or anyone else want to address any of it.
So as I'm sure you read through the PDF, right, so we tried to break it down between administrators. Administrators would be myself, Superintendent Holtzman, Mr. Gardner, and others, we'll say at the director level. We then also broke it out for coordinators. We also broke it out for principals as well as assistant principals. So those are the 4 demographic groups. Going back to administrators, you'll see some assistant directors also in there, such as Ms. Thea Murphy.
LEA years? What the acronym stands for?
Oh, Local Education Association. So deep down, and it's dependent upon the individual who's entering the data, right, is you could have total years. So an example, and I'm going out on a limb here, Mr. Holtzman has 30 years in education. That would be his total. Maybe he has 2 years here at the School District of Janesville, so the LEA, Local Education, right, would be the 2 here.
Particular thing is what have we done in the past, and then anything that has come to the board president that falls in this committee. And then after that, it's whatever the committee would like for us to particularly address or have a conversation. Then after that, it's more just a brainchild, as I said, of Mr. McCray and I. So I'll say historically, I'm going to give Mr. McCray kudos, and as he has shepherded us through lots of agenda items, really with a focus on educating us as board members to put us in a position to make decisions. So that is what we've done. There have been a few of these, I'll say, more oddball agenda items. I shouldn't say oddball, not necessarily from an education standpoint, like the last one, it was just information. But that was Greg being oddball, pick up other things, so. Mr. McCray?
So it was not a report I was able to generate in time for this meeting, but in speaking with Superintendent Holtzman and Commissioner Ardrey, separate conversations, I think one of the things, particularly Ms. Johnson, since you're new to the committee, is we will probably do a recap, if you will, of topics. Not necessarily go through every topic, right? But when have we talked about revenue limit authority or equalization aid or those, if you will, technical aspects of school finance? I think it just may serve as also, oh, that's right. You know, McCray spoke for 90 minutes on revenue limit authority, one meeting way back in 2019. I can't sleep. Let me go back and watch that, right? So just kind of a recap, because I think it serves as a good reminder. As board members, you're presented with a ton of information, right? And I may say, you may recall And you may go, I don't, right? But that's in part because, not of your memory, but because of the volumes of information we share, not only at finance, right, but PPC and as a board as a whole, right? So Ms. Jensen does a great job in terms of mapping out the board's agenda. I probably can take her lead and map out in terms of looking forward in concert with Superintendent Holtzman and Commissioner Ardrey, right? But also just taking that look back, what have we talked about, right? Because we talk a lot, I talk a lot, right? So, and just to really recap, I do appreciate, I'd say I'm blessed to work with a really good team. And that team takes the perspective of, being transparent. We'd be giving you a copy of an 800-page budget, but providing clarity is really trying to take the committee and the board through that budget at a high level so that there's a understanding of the budget, clarity to the budget. So thank you.
Any agenda items?
Since I'm new and I have no idea too much, I mean, I just listened to Mr. McCray, but one thing that no one has mentioned yet is something that I think we do need to discuss at some point. Especially because we are building and grounds, is the issue of climate crisis and ways in which we can become more sustainable and resilient in terms of building sustainability and also better health, public health, which will also mean individual health for teachers and students and everyone. So, I mean, a variable that really is going to become very prevalent is the climate crisis and the resulting consequences. It's going to have very significant health consequences and health costs related to it. For example, the air quality, let's just say that, because already some areas of the state, I mean, fortunately, we did not have bad air quality yet this year, but some areas of the state did experience that, and I'm sure there will be a time when we experience it again in southern Wisconsin as well. So I think it needs to be in the back of our minds and kind of, as we're thinking forward, having it kind of help guide us forward, I would say. I'm not saying this, I'm mainly saying it because of the health issues involved, and yeah, so.
So I would say that's one of the items that is in the forefront of our thoughts. Much of the work that was done, I guess looking at buildings, it was with a focus of air quality. I mean, that was one of the major pieces. So as we parse and piece out and we look at, we as a board, what we want to address, survey results, our thoughts, that will be a piece of it, but that's definitely a part of one of the key pieces we have done. As we think of, and I'm going to get to a question for you in a moment, but just a little bit of this is what we have done.
Okay.
Additionally, as we look at our energy use,
Yes.
it's one of the key pieces that we've looked at and looked at ways to reduce or not to have it increased.
Right.
One of the pieces that I know is missing, we can do 100% of everything of the right, install all of the right things. The piece that's always missing is behavior. Because the behavior piece ends up trumping whatever you've done. So we can talk safe pathways, But if somebody's holding the door for people or putting a wedge in the door, we've thrown that out. It's no longer
That's
safe.
true.
So the piece that, and I'll say I struggle with is how do we get to the behavior portion? Even for the buildings we have today. The, Mr. McCray mentioned Apex Building Systems. Is that, I get that right? Apex, I'll just leave it at Apex. They're one of the industry leaders, at least in this area, of doing lots of reviews of things. One of the things, if they just did a quick walkthrough, and they would say, you would be better to manage your building envelope by making sure the interior doors are closed. Because when we have double doors, often the inner door is propped open. So when we start talking air quality, the systems don't help that. I mean, so those are some of the things that we have to factor in. So when you say, and this was specific for an agenda item, with respect to that, what would you like to see with what you were saying? We have done some recent studies looking at indoor air quality at different times of the year. Not much we can do about that. It's information for us to use going forward. But I'm not sure, as Mr. McCray and I were talked through, is what would this look like from an agenda item? So if you can flush that out anymore or share that with me, that would be good.
Sure. Maybe you can give me some information too. So who is the person who, yeah, because actually there are grants out there now for schools regarding air quality and many other different variables, thinking about different variables. And who is the person who does that, researches the grants and helps us get the grants? Who does that?
No one.
Ew.
We don't have anybody available to research. We do have a grants coordinator who is all over ESSER. Her name is Tammy Carlson.
Yeah, right.
She's
I
all
met
over
her.
that as
Yeah.
well as the other
I
grants.
did meet her. Yeah.
But we don't
Okay.
have a staff, unfortunately, sitting
Oh, that's too
for
bad.
research.
Okay.
so
Well,
if-
that's an agenda item. How about that one then? At
Once it-
some point, we need someone willing to research grants because eventually, I mean, we're already talking about how, in thinking for the future, I mean, we are going to need more funds than what we are able to get from our public and from our state and so forth. So it needs to come from somewhere, and in order to keep us sustainable and, you know, functioning at a high level that we've been functioning.
Not that I disagree with you, but,
Okay.
so that would be staffing. And
Yes.
I'm not sure where we pull to come up with a researcher for those things. And it's a struggle that we all have. It's like, how do we get to some of those things with the resources? It may appear like we have a lot of resources, but as it's been presented, most of our staff is dedicated to doing other stuff.
Yeah, I
so-
understand that. I understand that.
I mean, so some of the things, years ago, there used to be a utility coordinator that dealt with some of these things. We worked on, you know, even behavior for the stuff I talk about. But quite frankly, as the budgets have become tighter, those pieces have not been there. So we've had to reduce those. Mr. McCray.
Yeah, so great comments, and not to prolong, and I have a tendency to do that, right, is Matthew Sylvester, Knudsen, Tammy Carlson, and myself, Dave Leader and Dave Farwell, are members of the Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials, and the amount of continuing ed that they provide is absolutely fantastic. So we may go to a session, and then there'll be a presenter, and I'm gonna throw an acronym out there. Commissioner Archie's gonna ask me what it is, and I cannot recall at the moment, but it's an IRA, right? So there's a federal grant out there if you want to do geothermal, right? And do we do geothermal? Okay, and you're going to get a rebate. Well, the problem is do you have the upfront cash to do that? So our friends in Wanakee or our friends in Neenah, my counterparts would say, yeah, we embrace that opportunity, only because perhaps on deck, they happen to have a past facilities referendum, and they were able to capture that lightning in the bottle at the time and leverage those federal grant dollars, right, to subsidize their referendum ask, right? So timing sometimes is rather critical. I think sometimes, and I don't disagree, Commissioner Ardrey is spot on. So well over a decade ago, we had an energy manager within the district. Staffing got tight, classroom teacher, energy manager. We lost out on the energy manager to focus on the classroom educator, right? And rightfully so, right? We can again go back to what's our revenue limit per member and where we're at in comparison to our peers, right? So that sometimes is where we really need to focus. When we go back to what we're looking at, right, so I want to assure you, like, this is on our minds, and so I'm glad we're, if you will, in sync, is Commissioner Ardrey referenced how we're looking at IAQ at our elementaries, right? Keep in mind, 11 of our elementaries do not have conditioned air, right? So we have humidity, CO2, and temp issues relative to that learning environment, and people who are working in that environment, as well as people who are learning in that environment. When we look to the capital maintenance, the base package of 169, and we're looking at the 11 elementaries, right? There are committed dollars as part of that package, right, to improve our IAQ elements, our conditioned air at those elementaries, as well as other areas, right? So if we can gain momentum with perhaps a potential board adoption as well as a community acceptance, right, that really begins to pave the way for us as a district. Now, as we're doing that work, right, and now I'm in Commissioner Ardrey's land of Alliant Energy, right, is there an opportunity while we're looking at a roofing project to perhaps put solar on that roof to get a kickback for that? Absolutely. What can we do? Alliant Energy will want that energy to come back to them, or do we keep that, if you will, in our district, right? So those are just details we don't know at this point in time, because we're looking out, right? But until we have some capital investment in which to work with, it does limit our options.
Inflation Reduction Act.
Thank you.
But,
I'll add to that.
yeah, okay.
Most nonprofits hire someone part-time to look
Yeah.
for grants,
Yeah,
and nothing says we can't do that.
yeah.
And I think it's worthwhile looking at where
I
are
do
the
too.
grants? Are they worthwhile in that?
Yeah.
But an investment, you don't have to take a full-time person to
No.
get started. Eventually, that
don't.
person funds themselves and returns a lot of money to that entity. And that's where the nonprofits get a lot of their money, with a part-time person.
Yep.
Sometimes even someone that'll donate some time plus part-time.
Right.
And I think that has a lot of merit.
I do too.
And that, we need to look at other sources of revenue, because it's tough referendums.
Right.
You got a state that got brakes on them, that type of thing. So I think it's worth looking into and putting up as a subject.
Definitely, I do too.
In that, maybe it doesn't work, but could we come up with $20,000 or $30,000 to fund someone for part-time to do that, working with the various entities we already have in the school, individuals that are familiar with
Right.
certain things with their subject matter and that. So I'd like to see it too. So thank you.
So, and I just don't want you guys to misunderstand my comments. I'm not saying it's not worthy, because it's absolutely worthy. But as we start to make choices between what is the focus, I'm 100% in agreement as we look forward. Yes, it's a need, but where do we take the resources from today? So if we're still trying to pull together what does this agenda item look like, right now, I'm not sure I have enough information to ask anything of our staff and Superintendent Holzman
Well-
to look at this to say, how do we get there?
I think we do. I think we do. Because we live in a community. We don't just live, we're not on an island called School Island. We're within a community, and the city of Janesville is part of the Green Tier Legacy Communities, and so is the Rock County. Rock County is also a member of Green Tier Green Tier Legacy Communities. And Green Tier is part of the DNR. And although the members are not schools yet, I don't believe, they've got municipalities, counties, and businesses. But they have a lot of information available readily. And, I mean, I'm sure they will, share it with us as well as with, the county and the city. And we have people, like Mr. Domershausen said, we have a lot of people in our community who are willing to donate time, and if they just get some kind of stipend or something, they will go with it, because people are very much, I mean, the people who care about this kind of thing, it's a cause. It's not about, oh, I'm doing X amount of work, so I need X amount back. No, it's not about that. It's a cause. And I think it's worth pursuing.
So I think, I mean, and I understand where we're coming, and I think at this point, we probably have went way too far for a non-agenda item. So what I would ask you guys to do
Okay.
is to put together whatever it is, so then we can endorse it as a,
Committee?
in this one, I'm gonna, because this is bigger than just a committee. I agree that the work would be done for the committee, but this is a board-type request to go through the board president, so that whole agenda item go through the board president.
Okay.
If it's endorsed, because I think this is something that I will believe the 9 of us would want to say, yes, we want staff to spend time working on, because that's, or if it's just the case of saying, if you have great information, please bring it, then we have to still determine what we do with it and how we do it. So we need to have that be endorsed by the board to move forward with that. So, from my viewpoint.
Okay, we can do it.
Understand what you
Yeah.
need.
Okay. And I'm new, so I don't, but I'll work with Carl. We'll do this.
Sure. Any other potential items?
Thanks.
Okay, we have reached the end of our agenda. We are adjourned.
Okay, thank you.